Our next element is relationship family challenges, and a lot of families have challenges. It's just a natural thing to happen, but there's a few of them we're going to look at in particular that relate back to some that are a little bit more common than others. So we're going to look at our step-family transition, parental favoritism, and interpersonal conflict. So starting off with this idea of step-family transition, we could say that it's more difficult for adolescents. Now, my parents were divorced when I was the age of 10, and my father remarried, but my mother did not. And my father remarried only a couple years after, so I was probably around the age of 12-ish, 11 or 12, I think, when my father remarried. And I remember initially just not being totally comfortable with my stepmother. And then, of course, many years went by, and I think they were together at least 15 years before she passed away. And there was definitely a relationship that had built over time. I think that's an important element to look at when we're looking at what happens with families is just what happens over time. But I think when you're trying to figure out who you are, it's a challenge to have somebody else step in, whether they're trying to take on discipline with you or not. It was not, my stepmother did not try to take on any discipline with me or my brother. So that was not an issue in our particular case. And my father really took that on himself. He had been a child of divorced parents in a time when it wasn't very common for parents to be divorced. And his parents did not make it easy on him at all. They did all kinds of things that made it more challenging for him, including saying cruel things to each other, having him carry the money back and forth between the parents, all kinds of things that just made life very, very difficult. And so he made the commitment to not have that happen with my brother and I don't think he ever wanted to be a divorced parent in the first place. So it was really difficult for him to kind of walk through that process as far as having step parents and all those elements and how to get along in those arenas. And I think sometimes parents don't participate in their children, once they become divorced, but that certainly wasn't my situation. Both of my parents were very involved in my life, and so my stepmother just became more of a friend as time went by, because she didn't try to take on the role of being a disciplinarian or try to make decisions about who I was or what rules apply to me in that particular context. Another thing that, well, I'll cover that in just a second. Let's talk about this idea of triangulation, and I'll talk more in this process about what to do with step-family transition that might make things easier for people. Triangulation ends up being a little bit of a challenge, and it's going to happen in families where two of the family members move or unite against a third family member. So that makes it more of a challenge for people in these family situations because they feel like people are ganging up on them. So this could happen in a couple situations. It could happen between a child and their two parents. So again, with my father, where the parents were arguing against each other, they were saying negative things towards each other, they were putting him in the middle, making him feel torn between both parents and basically his loyalties between them. And he had a single mother, so he felt a very strong connection to her and that he didn't want to do anything that might harm her. So really being put in the middle of that, and it's just not a fair place to put a child. I mean, they just really don't have the mental and emotional maturity to be able to handle something like that. I don't even think we have it as adults. So how did you expect a child to be able to handle that? And then just between step parents and children. So how is that going to work, between the parents, or if the parents are arguing, if people are trying to figure out who's going to be responsible for this child. And I didn't live with my father and my stepmother all the time, and my stepsister did. And so that became more of a challenge in that context than it was for me, because I didn't live there full time in that family unit. I lived with my mom. So it's definitely, creating situations where, you're causing separation between people, or having people feel really uncomfortable about how the relationship is developing. So some suggestions are to go slow but start early. So this idea of making sure that you are, building those relationships at the very beginning, and not trying to hurry it, because I think kids, as the relationships start to develop, even though the parents have bonded, the kids haven't really bonded with the adult yet. So don't be in such a big hurry to create those relationship bonds. And again, children are trying to figure out who they are and how they should deal with the situation. So they are worried about, not being loyal to one parent over another. Those can certainly cause challenges. Practical daily maintenance, so just making sure that you're connecting with people on a daily basis, and create new family rituals. I think this is important, that you create something that is specific to your unit, because you're creating a new family unit. So what does that look like with that new family unit? And remember, I know I'm not the only child that ever did this, but I remember my parents, my mom always wanted to celebrate on the holiday, and my stepmother would always put together a big feast, and so did my mom. And so my brother and I would end up having 2 Thanksgivings and 2 Christmases, where we would eat until we couldn't eat anymore, and then we'd go to the other parent and then eat again when we weren't even hungry anymore. And so just trying to, be kind to both our parents and manage that. It's like a weird dance that you have between the both. And I think it happens too when, couples get married and they're trying to figure out which of their parents they should spend, Christmas with or Thanksgiving with, and sometimes they just divide them. Christmas belongs to one parent and Thanksgiving belongs to the other parent, and then every year they flip. Things like that, where they create something that's going to be workable for them. But maybe you do something special, like you have a special ritual that you do on Christmas Eve. My family never opened gifts on Christmas Eve, but my stepmother's family did. So they would open gifts on Christmas Eve. I always opened them on Christmas Day. So that kind of worked out okay with my family, because we were able to kind of break those 2 things apart. So figuring some of those things out in rituals and creating new things. My family does the Hartz fruit salad, and so we would get together. I think it was like between Thanksgiving and Christmas, and we would have to chop up the Hartz fruit salad, and it would sit there, and they would put it would sort of stew and kind of ferment a little bit by the time Christmas came. And then you put a little whipped cream and nuts on it. My dad had all kinds of rules. He still does. If we don't do the Hartz fruit salad every year, but if we do it, everybody has to cut an equal number of everything. So you have to cut all the hard fruit along with the easy fruit. Pineapples are easy, but the apples are hard and difficult to cut, and the grapes are small, so they're hard to cut. So just creating those fun things that, become something new that particular family can share. Avoid triangulation, so do what you can to create maybe an agreement or traditions or open communication between the step family and the parent that's not involved in that. So what does that look like? How can you create a situation where the child doesn't feel like he is placed between the parents and doesn't have to choose? And the last one is to be patient. And experiencing these kinds of transitions, it can take time. And, certainly the relationship between my stepmother and I built over the years. I think, gosh, I want to think that they got married when I was 12 or 13, and I think she passed away when I was in my early 20s. So there was some time in there for us to sort of build a relationship over time and really create that connection and bond between the two of us. So that was really important in my experience. So go from this idea of transitioning from step-parenthood to favoritism. It's another one of those situations that probably doesn't feel very good for children. There's already a sense of competition between children as you're going forward anyway. And then if the parents are actually playing favorites towards a specific child, certainly if both of them are, I mean, sometimes you'll have it like, daddy's little girl or, mama's boy, and they have a tendency sometimes to cross connect, but they also can connect with the same gender, so that can happen as well. And so there might be a tendency just to have a little bit more of a connection with a child just because that child shares commonality with you or common interests with you. So those elements sort of lend themselves to someone maybe feeling like they're being favored or the other child is being favored over them. So there might be the feeling of that, but there actually can be favoritism going on where there is resources that are being allocated to one child over another, and those can be like affection and love, praise, patience, money, all kinds of resources that go to one child, attending one child's events where they don't attend another child's events. And who knows what makes that happen, why one parent, has that connection. I would say commonality would probably be one, or they just feel more comfortable with one child over another. And I think parents understand that they shouldn't feel that. I think sometimes they just do. So this idea of favoritism can have long-lasting impact on a child, where a child that had a little bit that was considered the favorite child can be more professionally successful or have more life satisfaction just in general. And then sometimes the child that didn't feel that that they felt like they were the one that wasn't favored, they don't feel as close to the rest of the family. They might feel more conflict than those that grew up in more more equally handled families, more equitable families. So this can happen no matter what the size of the family or the gender or the ethnicity of the family. It just sometimes just happens. So the best approach in dealing with it is not to blame the child that was the favorite child's and not make it their fault, because a lot of times it just happens and it's not something that they caused or created. Another one is to consider, is it worth confronting the parents with this or not? Maybe you just keep your mouth shut. Maybe it doesn't make any sense to bring it up now. It's a tough situation anyway. I think a lot of times, parents may just say, oh, no, I loved all my children equally. But clearly, there was something going on, or just, again, it could just be perceived. But a lot of times too, if you happen to be the favored child, then maybe seek to sort of balance it out and help out another child. The example in the textbook talks about a woman that went through that with her father and said, it got to the end and he said, well, why are you giving all this stuff to my sibling? And he said, because she deserves it. I like her better. That's going to be painful. That's going to be something that's really difficult. And then in the textbook, it mentioned that the sister is very close to her, and she would just funnel resources to her sister. So rather than worrying about what was going on with the parent, she would just turn around and give her whatever it was that was missing. Resources to help her go to school. Another element of conflict is interparental conflict, and this one is hostility between parents, and this can be a challenge for a child. We talked about how we learn conflict and how we deal with conflict from our parents, and if your parents can't figure out how to get along with each other, the child is going to learn that as a behavior and think that that's normal. If they haven't been exposed to anything else, that's considered normal. So they say that children that are in these kinds of situations have a tendency to be more aggressive and show more delinquent behaviors. This can impact the child by interrupting their sense of emotional security, which is the spillover hypothesis, this idea that a child might feel insecure from coming from a family where there was a lot of argument. So seek therapy if you happen to be a child that maybe comes from those environments. One of the things I say is when we're looking at situations, you can say, hey, my parents, it's all my parents' fault. They treated me bad. These things happened to me when I was a kid. And well, you can say those things. It's not really helping you. So what are you going to do to overcome it? What are you going to do to make this be stronger or better? How do you create a situation where you feel more comfortable and confident as a person and learn? You're going to have to learn new ways of doing things that didn't relate to your parents because they clearly don't know how to do it. If they don't know how to do it, you're going to have to go out and educate yourself, and you're going to have to teach yourself how you're going to learn how to interact with people, because if that was your only model, you're going to have to expose yourself to something else and give yourself some other way of doing it, because that doesn't feel very comfortable or very happy, I don't think, for anybody. Certainly being the third person in that situation doesn't feel good because you're watching people argue and be upset with each other. Yeah, probably not cool. Probably not the best place for a kid to be. So again, if you're in that situation, educate yourself. Learn other ways of doing things so that you're not doing things the way that your parents did it, because they can't figure it out. So yeah, thank you.